Did you think understanding French speakers would be easy? I did. I eventually became a French citizen, but in those first few years, I felt like such an outsider on so many occasions. I wish I'd known how to do it smarter. So to help you understand real French years faster, here are 21 lessons I learned the hard way so you don't waste years like I did. Leçon numéro 1. For years, I'd be annoyed and frustrated with how slowly my French comprehension was improving. It made me desperate to find the way to progress fast. So I searched and studied, but after months, I could still barely understand movies. Lesson number 1 is that time in the language is everything. You can't study your way to understanding spoken French. Every second you waste trying to find the perfect method is time you could have spent exposing your brain to natural language. Leçon numéro 2. This one is from a student in our community called Jay. He used to freeze in conversations because he couldn't understand spoken French. He'd even give up on French novels by page 2. But he persisted and persevered, and a few months ago reported that he binged the series Ultimatum France in a couple of weekends completely without subtitles. He said, "I enjoyed it. It was just like watching any other Netflix show, only everyone was speaking French." Lesson number 2 is that understanding fast French is about not giving up and masses of input that you enjoy. Jay gradually built up a collection of French shows, films, YouTube channels, and podcasts, and all that led up to those 2 satisfying weekends. Leçon numéro 3. Another student, Julie, was frustrated when the French in a show she loved, Astrid, was so fast she only understood 20% of what was said. It was very discouraging. She realized it was just one of thousands of shows she could use to practice, so she brushed it off and moved on. Then, 6 months later, she came back to the new season of Astrid, and after watching 2 episodes, realized she had understood around 80% and was delighted with that progress. So lesson number 3 is that anyone can learn to understand everyone in French. It's just time spent in the right input as well as the right mindset. If a show or channel or film is making you feel crappy about your ability, move on, rack up the hours in the language through other sources and come back to it later. You need hundreds of hours to reach intermediate level comprehension. Don't sweat it over one thing you don't understand very well. Leçon numéro 4. I used to take the easy way out when I left home in France to visit the UK or go anywhere else. I would stop training my ear, and my excuse was that there were no French people around me to practice with. By the time I got back to France, I had lost momentum and it was so difficult to start again. So, lesson number 4 is to accept that if you're not in France, you have to create more chances to hear French. Find podcasts, radio stations, series, YouTube channels in French and listen to them every day, or at least several times a week. When you do that, you keep the momentum going because you'll still do it wherever you find yourself. And the identity shift from I'm someone casually learning French to French is just a natural part of my day comes much faster, and you'll have much fewer periods of stagnation. Leçon numéro 5. Even though I found lots of French content, I still didn't have the time to listen to it, or so I thought, which is okay here and there, right? Life isn't always predictable, but it was most of the time. So the end result was the same. My comprehension still didn't develop much. Then I read the first third of Atomic Habits by James Clear. Yeah, I never even finished it. And I found time that I had considered lost. So lesson number 5 is to attach your French listening to your existing habits. It's far more efficient to piggyback on top of your planned walk or run in the park with your new favorite French podcast than to find a dedicated slot in your already busy schedule. Or you can even try to watch a French news story before you scroll through your English one, so the English becomes a reward for you going through that discomfort. Habit stacking is a cheat code for finding more time for your French learning. Leçon numéro 6. We often bemoan how our lives are increasingly decided by algorithms, and as language learners, this can be really detrimental to our immersion time. We have the best intentions to sit down to YouTube and watch something in French, but before we know it, we've been sabotaged by YouTube suggesting some really appealing content that we must watch right now, and C'est en anglais, it's in English. Then 10 more videos go by and we've not watched any French. So lesson number 6 is to create a separate YouTube account that only shows you French stuff. Still using the same email address, you start afresh and teach the algorithm to only serve you French language content by searching for keywords in French and then watching videos. Any English stuff that might pop up, you can mark as not interested, and gradually you get a sabotage-free zone because YouTube thinks you only understand French or you only care about French. Leçon numéro 7. My student John was constantly discouraged because he didn't understand anything the first time he watched a video in French. It made him want to give up on more than a few occasions because it just sounded like white noise. We've all been there, right? What we guided him to do as part of our regular Ciné Club was to start watching the same video at least 5 times before the class. And what he says now is really revealing. He says it almost feels like they're speaking slower. So lesson number 7 is that listening to something multiple times is an absolute game changer. If you feel like you want to give up after the first listen, treat it like a judgment-free free pass for yourself. Watch the same thing around 5 times and be amazed by the difference in your experience by the 5th time. I recommend clips of around 3 minutes to be optimal, but you can do this with any duration, of course. Leçon numéro 8. Speaking of wanting to give up, I'm not proud to admit that early on in my French journey, if I didn't understand, by my definition, anything in the first 10 minutes, my willpower and interest were shot. One time I was at the cinema in Montpellier and it was a French film with no subtitles. Of course, we're in France, why would there be? So I had no choice, and you know what? Once I realized I had no choice, my body and mind relaxed and I realized I could actually follow the film fairly well. Lesson number 8 is that you will understand much more than you think, thanks to familiar contexts. Think about it. If you see someone walk into a room and you see their face fall, then another character's shoulders drop, they sit down heavily, maybe cover their mouth. The silence, the body language, the shift in mood, you understand intuitively that something terrible just happened, even if you missed every word of what was said. The emotional context carries the comprehension. That frees your mind to pick up new words here and there, and over time these accumulate to hundreds and thousands of words for specific situations. Leçon numéro 9. The main reason I used to give up in the first few minutes was that I was angry I couldn't keep up with what the characters were saying. It made me feel out of my depth, and despite having an advanced knowledge of the French language, I couldn't understand scenes from a film. What the hell? I was quite melodramatic, I admit. So I stopped listening word for word and I forced myself to focus on gist. And you know what? The floodgates opened. Lesson number 9 is words don't matter as much as messages. In every scene of a film, there's facial expressions, tone of voice, music, color temperature, emotion, and yes, words. But your brain is getting all of that and it's understanding messages from all of these variables working together. When you obsess over all the words, you block out the others and deprive yourself of comprehension. The words actually come when your brain puts together the full picture. Trust me. Leçon numéro 10. CFSE member Kate, by her own admission, missed out on so many conversations in French with her friends in France because she was translating word for so long. It slowed her down, and every casual stroll in the park or coffee chat became something of a chore. Eventually, she ran out of steam with that approach, so she decided to start listening like a baby does to its native language. And although she was skeptical at first, she's now understanding things by default without translating first. So lesson number 10 is the more you let yourself learn like a baby does, the better you'll be. Babies and toddlers listen to their native language for thousands of hours before they speak. Not translating is really jarring at first. It's about letting go of control, and for many of us, myself included, that is incredibly difficult. But let the conversation get to the end of a sentence or passage before you try to figure out what was said. But as Einstein said, madness is doing things the same way and expecting different results. Tu n'as rien à perdre. Leçon numéro 11. In the early days, English subtitles made me feel a lot more comfortable and helped me understand French videos even as a beginner. As I moved into the intermediate stage and still struggled to understand people that I attempted to speak to in real life or indeed films, I grew frustrated. So I switched to French subtitles and I understood and enjoyed my content far more. So lesson number 11 is that when you use English subtitles, you get better at translating but not comprehending French. In the moment, you're making life easier for yourself. The discomfort all but disappears, but in the wider picture, you're keeping yourself stuck by not training your ears. Leçon numéro 12. Now, using exclusively French subtitles was a good move that stopped me translating, but what I was unconscious of for a long time was that I was reading the subtitles and not listening. I got very good at understanding French in real time with the help of the subtitles, but take them away and I felt I was stranded at sea. This was before I realized the importance of all the other factors that aid comprehension that I told you earlier. I switched from using subtitles as a crutch and more as a reference tool, and now I'd say I understand 90% of what I watch on topics that I'm familiar with. So lesson number 12 is French subtitles support comprehension in a massive way if done right. Remember to trust that you will understand more than you think without all the words. Every second you waste reading could have been spent on listening. Try watching once or more without subtitles and then turn them on to fill in the gaps. Leçon numéro 13. How do you feel about answering the phone in French? I absolutely dreaded it. I used to screen every call, hope they left a message, or even better, just sent me an email. Then I was living in a place where I had to answer the phone whenever I had a package delivered because, long story short, my landlord hadn't connected my mobile phone number to the automatic gate at the entrance of the residence. Basically, I had to speak to the delivery driver to figure out where he was and then tell him I'd come to meet him at the gate or give him directions if the gate happened to be open. By about the 100th call, this interaction, no matter the driver or the package, was a piece of cake. So lesson number 13 is that if you don't understand people, it just means you need more exposure in that specific context. You're not rubbish or incapable of understanding. You need more time and exposure. Repetition to specific situations, i.e. context, leads to progress, and suddenly you'll realize you had an effortless phone call en français. Wouldn't that be awesome? Leçon numéro 14. If you thought yoga was supposed to be a relaxing experience, well, you should try it in a foreign language. For the first few sessions, I was so slow to follow the instructions because I would have to piece them together word for word. Listening for gist doesn't cut it in this situation. You need specifics. I would fall behind and stand out like a sore thumb. But I kept going regularly and eventually everything made sense without thinking, even if I still couldn't repeat the instructions word for word. But you know what? I didn't have to because I was a paying customer, and who does that? Lesson number 14 is you suck in some contexts. You excel in others, and in others still, you're just okay. One context doesn't define your whole French ability. Be patient and stick with it. You'll eventually be able to stay zen while analysing the instructor's grammar at the same time. That bit's optional. Leçon numéro 15. Another one of my students, John, but not the John from earlier, would get to the cashier at the supermarket, and when they were done scanning his shopping, he would jump to read the screen for the total amount because he couldn't bear the awkwardness that he felt of not understanding French numbers read out to him. He hoped that in time it would just get better, but it didn't. So I got him to turn this very specific part of his shopping into a goal by taking a breath and consciously asking the cashier, "Pardon, ça fait combien s'il vous plaît?" after they had said it once. So lesson number 15 is to control what you can control. If you ask, "How much is that?" in English, you don't give it a second thought. So why should you in French? Every time you look for the answer in writing, you're closing your ears to practice, and it won't get easier on its own. So control what you can control. In John's case, it was asking for what he wanted. Leçon numéro 16. Even if repeating the same video helps you get gist, when I want to dive deeper and know exactly what the person said, it's incredibly difficult. It feels like a wall of sound, sometimes even now, years on. Turning on YouTube subtitles sometimes helps, but often doesn't because they are auto-generated, and as of making this video, still often filled with videos with little to no punctuation, which is a nightmare if you're not an advanced speaker. Lesson number 16 is to use TurboScribe to generate accurate subtitles. They're not sponsoring this video. I just use it every single week for me and my students. The free plan is perfectly fine. Much of the time, comprehension is difficult not because of the speed, but because of the filler words like voilà, quoi, enfin, eh ben, those words that you don't learn in a textbook. TurboScribe does a great job at transcribing these, especially if you pick the whale mode for the highest quality. Leçon numéro 17. When I didn't understand anything from a film or episode, I would be angry and frustrated. Sometimes I could brush it off, but I carried those emotions with me everywhere I went because I wanted to call myself a French speaker so badly. Then I learned about what's called the negativity bias that's inside all of us and realized that I was only seeing half the story. Lesson number 17 is to give yourself permission to write down what you do understand compared to the past version of yourself. We are biologically programmed to focus more on the negatives in our environment and life. It takes active effort to recognize our strengths. Just because a feeling is stronger doesn't mean it's accurate. Note down your strengths and what you still have to work on, and your motivation and joy of the process will stick around. I promise you. Leçon numéro 18. Speaking of motivation, as you progress through the levels in French, the big changes take longer and longer to come. I was exhausted from not seeing the rewards that I wanted, so I ended up taking so many breaks from active study. Lesson number 18 is to trust data, not your feelings. Chances are you haven't spent the hundreds, if not thousands of hours listening to real spoken French that justify your frustration. When you know a process is going to take hundreds of hours and you track your time each week, you know where you are in the process based on objective data, not your feelings. Write down a target number and stay motivated because you get closer to it every single week. It's really powerful. Leçon numéro 19. Now, repetition, as you've heard me say, is amazingly helpful, and I would go so far as to say essential. But I personally really struggle to watch certain videos for more than a few days in a row. It can start to make me resent the task, which, if I were to let that continue, would lead me to probably giving up on repetition altogether, and I definitely don't want that, do I? So lesson number 19 is to gamify the experience of listening. The number one most important thing in learning by immersion is to keep listening. It doesn't matter how you get the repeated exposure as long as you do. One thing I started doing and recommending my students do is to make a game out of your listening. Choose present verb conjugation, passé composé conjugation, filler words like voilà, subjunctive, and then seek them out when you're listening. Then note them down and see in which contexts they appear. Leçon numéro 20. At the end of the day, the last thing I wanted to do was feel like I was doing work by watching a French series. I knew I had to do it, but I just couldn't relax into it. Gradually, I was able to ease into it by watching and listening to stuff that could help me out. So lesson number 20 is to watch stuff that solves a problem for you. You'll naturally engage with it and want to watch it because it has what you need, a solution. For example, I was dealing with some issues around running a business in France, and the algorithm gods one day put me onto this podcast called Je peux pas, j'ai business. Funny title. And when I listened, I was hooked because she covered the same challenges I had at the time. I wanted to listen all the time. It no longer felt like work. So listen to something you enjoy and it will remove the friction between you and racking up those hours, which after all is the most important thing. Leçon numéro 21. When I look back, I see how frustrated and stressed I was learning French. Something I chose to do for myself, yet much of the time I wasn't even enjoying it. I regret it, but in another way I don't, because it, along with all my other experiences, led me here talking to you, helping you on your French journey right now. But lesson number 21 is don't expect progress to be straightforward. It looks much more like this than a straight line because there are so many forms of French. Formal, informal, slang, fast, slow, prepared, improvised, eloquent, inarticulate, noisy settings, calm settings, on topics you know well and that you don't know at all. Then there's you, after good sleep, after bad sleep, on a good diet, on a poor diet, with lots of distractions, with few distractions. Try to enjoy the process and the results will come when they come. Stick with it, mon ami. I'm living proof of it. Now you understand how French comprehension actually works. But here's the truth. Building that comprehension takes hundreds of hours. So what do you do in the meantime when French speakers are talking to you right now on a daily basis? Well, I recommend you watch this video next, the 6 skills to follow fast French even when you don't understand every word. Allez, I'll see you over there.